Hey everybody. Today we will be talking about Ukraine and how to practice love, revolutionary love in wartime. I'm Valarie Kaur of the Revolutionary Love Project, and I don't know Ukraine, but I have been living every day of this war through the eyes of a longtime sister and friend, Michelle Goldhaber, who has spent the last 15 years working in Ukraine as a peacebuilder. So in just a moment, we're going to have Michelle on for a sister talk, and I encourage you to grab a cup of tea, to find a place in your home or wherever you are in which you feel safe. You can lie down, you can sit down. I see all of you coming into the room. I haven't seen you all in such a long time, and it's good to see you today. Heidi says, I needed this today. I needed to be with you all today. Karen, thank you for holding this space. I'm grateful to hold it with you all. As Michelle joins, there is something that I do want to say from my heart, and that is thank you for being here. Thank you for being here right now. I feel helpless is the thing that I have most heard myself say to myself, and it's the thing I have most heard us say to each other. I feel so helpless every day when we pick up the paper. I haven't been able to throw the papers away since the war began, because every headline is something that I'm trying my best to process. It occurs to me that helplessness, it might be how you feel, but it is not true. Helplessness is a fiction that men like Putin want us to believe. They want us to believe that the only people who have power in this world are rich men with access to weapons, men who act as authoritarians, whether in our small town arenas or on the world stage. They want us to look at the photograph of the family murdered on the bridge, trying to escape Russian bombs, and go numb. They want us to turn to stone. They want to get away with it. But that is the old order. If we are to birth a new world, it will take us reclaiming power, our power. You have power, my love. I have power. We have power together. You belong to a network of community as rich and as real as the matrix of roots beneath our soil. In every encounter, in every conversation, in every choice you make, in every choice we make, in every moment we share, we are co-creating our culture, and we are shaping what happens next. And the truth is, there are billions of us, and a handful of them. There are billions of us who want a world without hierarchy, without cruelty, and without war. To sit in that truth is to access the agency that we have within us. And that agency, to feel it, means to let breath in our body. You know, it's okay if you have felt breathless. Like, your breathlessness is not a sign of your weakness. It is a sign that you are awake. It's a sign of your courage, that you have the capacity to care, to look, to take in. And that's a lot. That's a lot given everything that we have been carrying between the pandemic and the climate crisis and democracy in shambles here at home, to be able to lift our gaze to Ukraine and take that in too. Your breathlessness is a sign of your bravery, that you have the ability to be awake right now. And only in community do we put breath back in our bodies. Do we put a sense of agency and power back in our bodies? Do we learn how to be brave with our grief? How to harness our rage? How to let in even joy in a time like this, even as we are navigating what our most meaningful role might be. So that is my wish for this hour. That is my wish for our time together. And the person who has been putting breath in my body on late nights when I'm in the closet so that my children won't hear me on the phone after they've gone to sleep. I call Michelle and she's somehow awake even though she's on the East Coast and I'm on the West Coast. And Michelle Goldhaber, you know, you'll see. You're going to meet her in a moment. And there she is. Are you ready? Good. Michelle is in Boston. Hello, my love.
Hello, dear Valarie. It's great to see you.
I'm just going to bask. Be able to. Usually we're on the phone.
I know. And usually in the middle of the night, it's still
Yeah.
daytime.
So to see the sun set almost on your face as we're talking is a real gift right now. I want to spend a moment introducing you before I ask you a lot of things. And
Okay.
say is that so Michelle and I met in divinity school at Harvard. And I will never forget the late night walks and talks down those cobblestone streets. There was so much that we shared with this ache that we felt for the world and this desire to be able to respond to it. After divinity school, I watched you take that Fulbright and spend time in Ukraine, fall in love with Ukraine, and in all the years, over the course of 15 years, to see you make trips back and forth, to have such a big community of loved ones, and for you while you're there to do interreligious work, intergroup work, peace building work was so inspiring. And I always thought that one of these trips I would just go with you, that you would pack me in your suitcase and you would take me. And so as the invasion began and the war broke out, my heart was with you and with trembling voice on the phone, hearing your voice in turn. And so, my love, I just want to ask you, just in this moment, what are you holding in your body?
So much. And I really want to thank you, Valarie, for your friendship and support over the years. So before I talk about what's in my body, I mean, we go way back and we've shared so much, and you have been such a guiding light and inspiration and beautiful, loving presence in my life. And I'm just so grateful to be having this talk with you now, and for all your support, and for bringing attention to what's going on in Ukraine. So, it's been really tough, and I should say that I'm speaking from a place of relative safety. I'm here. I'm on Cape Cod by the ocean. I'm very far away. I don't have blood relatives there, although I have people who are very much like family, and so a big part of my heart is there. And I go from trembling to being exhausted. Sometimes I feel really strong. So I'm exhausted, also quite exhausted. But it's nothing compared to what my friends are living with right now in Ukraine, even when they're in a safer part of the country. Just the constant anxiety and panic and air raids and not knowing, if this is the air raid that's going to be, the one that includes shelling of their buildings. So, and some have already experienced that, and some have fled, and some are internally displaced. So a big part of my heart is there, and feeling a bit helpless. 3 weeks ago, all I wanted to do was just get on the next plane and just be there doing whatever I could. And I might still, but, from a more planned out place. But I'm doing everything I can to support from here, which feels like very little compared to what needs to happen. So
I can only imagine, like, every time you're on the phone with your loved ones in Ukraine and they're in bomb shelters or about to go down and you're going along with them, that witness and that support, that holding them in that trauma, that is something. And right now, perhaps everything, because survival is everything right now.
survival is everything. Absolutely. Everyday life is a huge accomplishment. I can imagine, I'm not there living it, but from what I understand.
Can you tell us about some of those conversations with those friends?
Well, most of my friends are in Lviv right now, which is, most people know where that is now. And it is considered one of the safer places, although that safety is eroding, I fear. And I think the sense of safety is eroding. So I think a lot of them are dedicating themselves to helping in whatever ways they can. Lviv has become a hub of internally displaced people or people transiting out to other countries. So right now there are a lot of people there in need of help who are very traumatized. And so a lot of my friends are engaged in some of that support work, or they're just trying to maintain some semblance of normalcy, doing whatever work needs to be done for their jobs, being with family, being with friends, communicating with people. So some of them, unfortunately, were in some of the cities that were more violently hit recently. And so they are now, most of them, out of danger, which is very good, or at least immediate danger. But, they were doing everything they could to survive in the bomb shelters or in their buildings with, you know, sirens and bombs and shelling happening right around them.
Mhm. Well, and it's Sunday. I feel like every day it has changed. It's Sunday afternoon, March 13th. What is the latest news that you feel like we all should know?
The latest big news that I'm aware of, and it's so fluid, it could be changing right now. It's nighttime there, which is when a lot of the violence happens. But last night, a military base outside of Lviv, close to the Polish border, was hit by Russian missiles emanating from Russia, not locally, but from Russia, about 1,700 kilometers away. And it killed at least 35 people and wounded, 150 others. So that was pretty big. And I'm not an expert on the geopolitics of it, but that's a huge act of aggression. That base is known to be training some foreign nationals who have gone to support the Ukrainian military. It's very close to the border with Poland. Um, it's a place where Americans have gone to help train the military in the past. So it's an aggressive act, not just in actuality, but symbolically. And I think it moves all of us, not just Ukraine, but all of us closer to further escalation with Russia.
Mm-hmm. Can you give us a glimpse? I mean, it just strikes me, have you having spent the majority of your adult life committed to this country and these communities and these people who you know deeply, who you love deeply, and not just as a friend, but as someone who was invested in peace building there. And for you to then sit and witness, over almost overnight, these rich communities and these landscapes turned into hellscapes. I mean, if you can give us a glimpse of the kind of work that you were doing and then what you're seeing now through that lens.
Yeah, great question. And it was very drastic. I mean, I know there was a lot of lead up in our media towards this, which proved true. But I think most of my friends in Ukraine thought it could happen, but weren't really expecting it. And so it has felt very abrupt. Um, well, when I went there for the first time in 2002, I was interested in looking at healing and religious pilgrimage places of different religious groups. And that's the trip where I fell in love with Ukraine. And I felt like I had what Christians might call a calling, that my work would be here, that I felt a really strong pull to this place, to this land, and to this history. And I felt that my role as a Jew would involve some kind of peace building. And I had all kinds of inner dialogue about that because at that time, um, a lot of people in the American Jewish community were concerned about me going to Ukraine. We have historic animosity between Jews and Ukrainians. And that was some of the draw for me to see, how and if I had a role in mending even just a little bit of that, which might have been, completely arrogant, because I'm not the one that lived through some of those painful experiences. But I followed my intuition and really sunk into the place and let it sink into me. And it's been a beautiful relationship through ups and downs. There were times when I questioned what I was doing there, facing, walls with swastikas on them years ago. It's a lot better now, but um, the positive always outweighed the negative for me, and the allies and the support and the friends, the genuine friends there, who always made me feel like part of their families and very welcome and important and cared for. They gave me a lot of hope. And so my work over the years meandered. A lot of it was dedicated to Jewish-Ukrainian relationship building and truth telling about history. And sometimes it branched out to include people of all different backgrounds, racial, ethnic, religious, political backgrounds. It was often experiential, involving expeditions in the wilderness or experiential team building outdoors and nature with people from all over the place. We spent a lot of time in Crimea, which is interesting to think about now, and in the mountains, in the Carpathian Mountains, and various places. And most recently, I was working with the Ukrainian Catholic University in Lviv, Ukraine, kind of supporting their building of a Jewish studies program and hoping to do sort of an exchange program with the rabbinical school that I'm currently attending. So I still am hopeful, maybe naively so, that we're going to have a beautiful exchange program with students in each place and seminars and workshops. And, I'm hoping that that will continue in defiance of what's happening now.
Even as you're describing it, I can see in your eyes like a flash of those memories.
Absolutely. And, back in 2002, when I had that first calling, I had a vision of myself as sort of an ambassador, kind of representing a different face of Judaism to Ukrainians in Ukraine, but also bringing back some of Ukraine to the Jewish communities that had so much historic fear and resistance to being open to that relationship. And it's definitely, over the last 20 years, definitely improved organically. But this recent situation has confounded me in such a positive way that there is so much outpouring now in the Jewish community for Ukraine and so much interest. And it's unbelievable to see it, but I'm very grateful for it.
There's a unifying that I could,
Mm.
I can imagine you, Boston based, have been the only Ukraine person for most of your friends who, where is it on the map? Like, and suddenly everyone's learning about Ukraine and the Russian invasion, the war. It's so morally clear that the invasion of a sovereign nation, the use of brutality and cruelty and the attacking of civilians, it has, unified most of the world to stand against this kind of cruelty, this kind of atrocity. And and as you're saying, like communities that previously had complex relationships or uncertain relationships, suddenly like they're standing clear, they're standing strong. And that perhaps that there's a silver lining to be drawn from this. It's a clear awakening of the costs of authoritarian regimes on the world as a whole. So I'm hearing that, and you as a Jew, seeing your Jewish community in the US suddenly, right, standing in solidarity and not knowing what you were doing before, but getting it now.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's a particular, almost like a genetic pull, because so many Jews in the United States, not all, but a lot, are Ashkenazic Jews who originate from Eastern Europe and whose families fled from pogroms that happened at the turn of the 20th century,
Wow.
19th to 20th century, and others who were Holocaust survivors and experienced other atrocities and traumas in their families. And so I think this is hitting a nerve that's been very, intergenerational trauma kind of nerve.
Mm-hmm.
So and there are, I tend to look at things in more of a mystical, spiritual way. There's the birthplace of the mystical Jewish movement, the Hasidic movement, is right in Ukraine. So I think that there is this extra pull that is finally getting to breathe a little bit. That is because this attack is so one-sided and so clear morally, and it is so easy to identify with the Ukrainian victims in this situation. I think it's clearing the path for some of those connections that Jews might feel for Ukraine to feel unencumbered now, a little bit more unencumbered.
And this kind of outpouring and this unifying, of course, is also touching upon an awareness of where and when we haven't shown an outpouring of support toward refugees fleeing war and atrocity.
Absolutely.
We're seeing, Syrian refugees in the millions, as we're seeing the refugees escaping, moving from South and Central America here at our southern border. I'm noticing a lot of people ask themselves, why is it that it has been so easy to see myself in the Ukrainian mother and children hiding in the bomb shelter, and perhaps harder for me to relate or imagine that that could happen to me when I saw images of the father with the 3-year-old daughter face down in the river in Texas, or the Syrian refugee camps in the last few years. There's a distancing that has seemed easier to do when people see images of refugees who are people of color. And here, because Ukrainians present as white, how easy it has been for so many to feel the pain and the urge to act.
Right.
And I say that not to shame us, because I am, white supremacy is what you breathe in. So even for me, it's so much easier for me to see whiteness as the norm, as a woman of color, than it is for people even who have my own skin color. So it's like we have been wired and programmed to see white as an us instead of as a them. And I think I say this not to shame us, but to say, is this awakening? Is this reckoning? Is this curiosity about how we have responded, how your body has responded? Does it carry information? and with the information you've gained, is there information about the work that you are ready to do next, to expand your sight, to see no stranger, to see all refugees? And maybe this is the moment where people, in expressing compassion for Ukrainian refugees, are finding inside of themselves the ability to express compassion, to let into your circle of care all refugees. Like, what if this was the moment that the United States became a home for all refugees, open arms with welcome, as just one example of the kind of how we see differently could lead to doing differently.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, it's impossible to ignore that dynamic right now. And I think especially here in the United States, with our Black Lives Matter movement, and the proximity of that to this, it's so vital that we see that all refugees are deserving of our heartbreak and our sympathy and our outreach. And hopefully this is a wake-up call that, just as broken as we are over what's happening in Ukraine, we should be just as broken over what's happening in Afghanistan, Syria, Iraq, the southern border. Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
I hope you're right that this will be a doorway so that the United States can once again be a welcoming place for refugees. Or maybe not once again, maybe for once.
For once.
Maybe it never was.
And that's the big picture, imagining that I want to invite us into in this hour together, because if we're saying helplessness is a fiction and that we have the power to co-create culture and shape our future, then yes, in the immediate term, in the short term, Putin has power and the tanks are invading, right? And resistance is what is needed. and to be able to resist, to help Ukrainians resist as much as possible as a nation, as individuals. We'll be talking about how and the role that we can play. But I'm interested also in the long-term impact of how we can shape the world that wants to be born, a world where we never give, we never give authoritarians like that power. Like, what if we could make all authoritarians, demagogues, white supremacists relics of history? In our small towns, right? In our neighborhoods, in our school districts, in our cities, from block to block, heart to heart, we're not seduced by that kind of power because we see it for what it is. And to stand in this moment and to declare love, a revolutionary love, to not have any tolerance for anyone who draws the line between us versus them, I think is an act of the imagination, like a revolution of the heart that is possible, that I do deeply believe in, and it in fact is the greatest power. And so maybe the change I'm talking about is like the 5 years from now, the 10 years from now, but I feel like it's that long-term change that is possible if we are vigilant now, awake now, and act now.
Right, right. And as you say, there's a role for everybody, and sequencing is important. So I think that it's so important for people to be documenting now, people who are experiencing the trauma, to be writing it, to be sharing it. And a lot of people are posting, sharing pictures. But I think for people who have more distance, like you, like me, we can analyze, we can vision 5 years into the future. Whereas people right now experiencing it, they just want to survive day to day, hour to hour. So, but I think it's so important to be reflective and to capture what's happening in this moment and to speak to it and learn whatever we can, and in real time as well as afterwards when we're looking back on it.
I just love those words, that we all have a role at any given moment, at any given time in the larger movement. And the larger birthing labor for a more just world. Like, what is our particular role? And so that leads me to talking about what it means to practice revolutionary love. And so I want to pause and just say that I see the chat is just so stunning. I just see all of these incredible comments, and I also see your questions. And what I'd like to do is ask you to hold those questions. You can even type them in the chat now, but don't press send just yet, because what we're going to do next is we're going to be talking about a tool that we can put in your hands. Especially those of us who are witnesses, what is the tool that we can hold in our hands that make us feel like we are not helpless? And that is the Revolutionary Love Compass. So we'll be talking about the Revolutionary Love Compass with Michelle. And then we'll be sure to pause and have time for your questions towards the end. Does that sound good? Okay. I already have questions that were already poured in, so we'll see. Okay, so and you know what, I'm gonna do one thing, because I don't want any of you to feel like you're scrambling to write it all down. So everything I'm about to share with you all is at this URL, revlovehub.org. And I'm going to see if I can, yeah, I've pinned the comment. So there's your URL, where anything that you hear that feels like is something you want to take and practice, there's your source. Okay. All right, so we'll start with love. So we're going to start with defining love. I define love as more than a rush of feeling. Love is sweet labor, fierce, bloody, imperfect, life-giving, a choice we get up and we make every day. And if love is labor, then love contains the whole range of our emotions. Joy is the gift of love. Grief is the price of love. Rage, our outrage, is the force that we harness to protect that which we love. What I call revolutionary love is the choice to extend that labor beyond what evolution requires. So what happens when we labor like that for others who we may not know, for our opponents, and for ourselves who we too often neglect? That is when love becomes revolutionary. So my definition for revolutionary love is the choice to labor for others, for our opponents, and for ourselves, to transform the world around us and within us. There are three main practices for revolutionary love. And I imagine them as points on this compass. So this is what you'd find at the URL. So others, opponents, and ourselves. And I'm going to talk through each section. So Michelle, it's like I'm going to talk you through this and let you respond and tell us about what it means to apply this compass to Ukraine. So this compass works as a tool that you can point to any person you want to practice loving. And then there's information for what actions might be useful to you. So the practice for loving others, that is what I call see no stranger. See no stranger, that we can look upon the face of anyone and say, you are a part of me I do not yet know. My sister, my brother, my sibling. That first practice is wonder, to wonder about others. And when we wonder about them, the conscious act of wonder can dampen the implicit bias we all carry. So to look at the picture of the family in the streets and to say, sister, my child, daughter, son, that act of wonder, that is retraining your eye to see them as your kin. And when that happens in a time of war, inevitably that gets us to the next practice, which is to grieve. And grieving, we often suppress our grief, think of it as secondary, but grieving is frontline social justice work, because in grieving together, we get information for how to fight for one another. We don't need to know people in order to grieve with them. We grieve with them in order to know them. And that is what's happening for so many of us who are grieving with the people of Ukraine. And remember, in grieving, there is no fixing it. There are no right words. There's only bearing it, which is helping others survive it. So every time you are on the phone with your beloveds in those bomb shelters, Michelle, I see you holding the trauma with them. I see you grieving with them. And that witness is alone enough in this moment to give them the next breath so that when the sirens go off, they can go up the stairs and bake bread, as you so beautifully described. They can find a way on. In grieving with others, we gain information for how to fight for them. And in the fight, I use warrior metaphors. I use sword and shield as a way to think about nonviolent action as creative and disciplined and courageous, and that we all have a role in the fight. Is your sword is showing up right now? Is that your pocketbook? Is it a donation you can make? You know, is it your artist's brush? Is it your doctor's scalpel? Is it your Twitter feed? Is it your Instagram live? Is it your voice? Is it your hands? Is it your feet? Are there marches? Are there vigils? Like, where in your classroom, in your community, at your university, wherever you are, there is something that you can do, one thing that you can do. And remember, the small act is the revolutionary act in the aggregate. So wondering and grieving and fighting are the core practices of how we see no stranger. And this leads to what I call deep solidarity. Shallow solidarity is rooted in the logic of exchange. I show up for you, so you show up for me. Like, Michelle, I'll post your hashtag, so you post mine. You know? Deep solidarity is rooted in this ethic of love. I show up for you, Michelle, because you are my sister. You are my brother. You are my sibling. And that kind of deep solidarity, long after the news cameras move on, that is what binds us over the course of a lifetime. And what I've been thinking a lot lately is that I'm so grateful to be alive on this earth at the same time as you, because we travel this lifetime together in deep solidarity, which is what we call sisterhood. So that grieving, the wondering and the grieving and the fighting, this is what we do interpersonally, but this is also what we can do for the actions that we take in the world, for communities, for countries who are in harm's way. And so I turn it over to you, my love, and ask you, where do you see the wondering and the grieving and the fighting come alive, or what do you want to see more of? Sit every day and watch this war.
Yeah, well, I feel like, and thank you so much for that description and walkthrough of that. It really resonates. And I think for a lot of people, we are doing all right with the grieving, you know, and collectively, I feel like right now we're getting that. And as we said earlier, it'd be great if we could remember how to do that with others as well. But right now, you know, I think I think we're doing all right with that. There's so many ways to respond. And I'm not sure exactly where to go with it. I feel like there's so much that's needed politically. But I think on an individual level, definitely there are organizations that are in need of support. Anything that supplies medical needs, tactical needs. Right now, there's a big need for helmets and bulletproof vests for the people who are literally defending their cities. There's a shortage of those things. So, you know, donating to small local organizations is usually much better than donating to larger ones, but it's fine if you donate to the Red Cross, that's great. If you donate to a local organization in Ukraine that is supplying those things, that's even better. I think, there's widespread support politically right now for, doing what we can to support Ukraine. And there's some disagreement about whether or not to provide a no-fly zone around the country and protect the airspace. And I know a lot of my Ukrainian friends feel quite strongly about that, as do I. And also there, even among my friends there, there's the understanding that that could be a provocative act and head us in a different direction. What I would say to that, and again, I am not an expert, but what I want to say is that Putin is already moving in that direction. And he is already taking those steps, and that we're letting him do it. We're waiting until he crosses a certain line. And it's heartbreaking to me because I feel like Ukrainians are paying that price with their lives. And he's just pushing further west. And I don't know what will trigger a reaction on our part, NATO and the West. Will it be when they get to the Polish border? Because they're awfully close right now. And so, again, I'm not an expert on all the ramifications, what could happen in different scenarios, but in the very least, individuals can write to their representatives. It's easy to find out who they are. They can urge them to provide even more military support for Ukraine so that they have a chance to defend their airspace. If they're not going to do it, if they're not going to provide the no-fly zone, at least they can supply ammunition, they can supply more training, they can supply even individuals who might, become Ukrainian citizens and go join the ranks. And it's really interesting. You're talking about non-military interventions and using that symbology for other purposes. And I and most of my friends in Ukraine are very, very much on the pacifist side of things, non-violent, non-military. But I think this is one situation that really warrants a stronger military response. And I think lines have been crossed with any civilian deaths, and it's just relentless, the targeting of civilians, of innocent people. And so I think, unfortunately, I think that's really what's needed in many ways. In addition to supporting refugees who are fleeing, who will need visa-free entry, dropping all regulations and all restrictions, and providing medical care, providing social services. And I think a lot of countries are beginning to do that. So that everything that we're doing, we can do more of. We can expand that. I think we're doing a lot of really good things, at the higher levels. So,
and that requires our collective will to keep pushing to do those things and expand those things every day as the war goes on.
Yeah, and there's one more thing I wanted to say, actually, and that is about the disinformation campaign.
Yes.
That Russia's launching, that they're experts in, and that we have experienced here, and we are still experiencing here. I've always thought that Trump took a lesson from Putin when that all was happening in our country. So I feel like, keeping abreast of what's happening in the Chinese media and the Indian media, looking out for what's happening in our country, believing some of the myths and the perspectives and the lies that are very insidious, and they're working really well in Russia and in other countries, and even here. So I think we have to be really on our guard for that. But I didn't mean to cut you off. You were saying something.
Right. I mean, here too, we've had a demagogue who has waged misinformation campaigns, who has manipulated media, who has dehumanized human beings. and who continues to pose a threat, and in fact has co-opted one of two major parties in our country to become an anti-democracy force. So if anything, may this moment wake us up to the fact that democracy is something that we must fight for.
Oh, absolutely. We're very vulnerable.
Yeah. There are a few really great there are more ideas in the chat for what people can do. And my beautiful friend, our friend Jessica Jenkins, who's an immigration attorney here in California, who I went to school with, she says U.S. residents can ask our government to end the Title 42 ban on asylum seekers so refugees can more easily enter the U.S. at the southern border to seek protection here. So you can go to the link in my bio to see the list of organizations. This was a list that Michelle sent me. And all of the organizations have been vetted. Most of them are local organizations who are doing that life-giving work on the ground. And so I think the thing to do is not to get overwhelmed by all the different ways that we just named, but for the one that feels like, oh, I can do this, that it speaks to the thing that is on my heart and my sphere of influence, with my voice, with my hands. This is the one thing that I can do. The small act is the revolutionary act in the aggregate. So that is that's really spelling out the how to fight. Okay, are you ready? This is harder. That was the easy one. And yeah, that's a lot. Okay, so what does it mean then to, let's put it this way, what happens when those in front of us are our opponents? How do we practice the ethic of love when facing our opponents? And before I say anything else, let me say this, that I intentionally do not use the word enemy. Enemy is a fixed and permanent identity. And I have come to believe in my own work that there are no such thing as monsters in this world, only human beings who are wounded, who act out of their insecurity, their blindness, their greed, their fear, their hunger for more power. That does not make them any less dangerous. But once we dissolve them from one-dimensional monsters and see their wound, we see their humanity. And in that act, they lose their power over us. We become freed. And so this act of preserving their humanity is an act of preserving our own humanity. And it is not just moral, it is a strategic act. It is a savvy act. It gives us information for how to respond in ways that attack the cultures and the institutions and the norms that allow their behavior. So this is all the reason why I use the word opponents. And this primary practice I call tend the wound. Now, this is really important, especially in this moment. It begins with tending our own wound. It begins with honoring our rage. And I say this because I've just been sitting with stories about Ukrainians right now. The overwhelming, this is the New York Times a few days ago, and this is what gave me the idea that we needed to make our conversations public. Because I think there is this misconception that practicing revolutionary love right now is this rush to forgiveness or rush to nonviolent response, right? But this is not loving kindness. This is loving revolution. This is revolutionary love, and we all have a different role at any given time. And there's a role for rage. So the Ukrainian poet Alexander Ivanets wrote, "I shout out to the whole world, I won't forgive anyone." If there is one overriding emotion gripping Ukraine right now, it is hate. My response to this is that sounds absolutely correct. That there is a role for rage, feeling our trauma, feeling our loss, and even touching that capacity to hate inside of us. It may not be where we are all the time. It may not be where everyone needs to be. But if you are someone who has a knee on your neck, it is not necessarily your role to look up at your opponent and try to wonder about them or listen to them. No, your role is to stay alive. to take the next breath. That is your revolutionary act, to take in the love of others who are helping you survive. And so to anyone in Ukraine who's feeling this outrage, not just at Putin, but at so many Russians who have imbibed the Kremlin's misinformation campaign, so they're not even calling what's happening a war. It is completely understandable to sit with that anger and that trauma and to have us witness it and honor it. It may be the role of the rest of us who are not the direct targets to move to the next practice here, which is to listen to those opponents, to try to understand them, not to legitimize them or compromise with them, but try to understand them. So those of us who know people in Russia, who, we honor those who are protesting and who are risking their lives and are getting on lists, arrested in the thousands. It's not an all-out anti-war movement yet, but it could be, so to honor that and to support that, and then to wonder about those Russians who are taking in that misinformation in the same way that I'm asking people to wonder about those Trump supporters who are taking in the narrative of a demagogue. What is seductive about that narrative? What is neat? What makes them cling to that story? So much of white nationalist aggression here at home is a symptom of unresolved grief. People are grieving the fact that their nation is changing, that they're letting go of this illusion that they ever had control, that this nation belonged only just to them. Someone needs to help them with that grieving process. Someone needs to help white people in this country learn how to become a minority with grace and with beauty. It's probably not going to be me, but it might be you. It might be, right? We all have a role of who's going to be listening to those others to understand them, to understand those in Russia who might have a role to play in waking up and holding their government accountable. And when we do that, and I can't wait to hear your response, by the way, when we do that, when we tend our wounds, and when we tend the wounds of our opponents, when we see the wounds in our opponents, we are better equipped to do this reimagining work. And this touches upon what you were saying earlier, that in the short term, and those directly targeted, it's all about resistance. And resistance with force in order to keep themselves alive, right? Resistance as a form of survival. But in the long term, and perhaps this is the role that we can play now, what does it mean for us to reimagine a world where authoritarians like that never get to the point where they have consolidated that much power to inflict that much damage on humanity? And so reimagining work is the work that I think so many of us here in the States can do if we're also, doing this dance too. So raging and listening and reimagining, figuring out what our role is at any given time. That is my invitation for how to practice orienting to our opponents right now with love.
Wow, Valarie. I mean, that is, I think, so beautifully put and so important because, first of all, the rage is real for anybody who's experienced abuse or violence. To ignore that rage and to cut it off, it just festers and gets stuck and it's inauthentic and it really needs to come out. So, and to not demand anything else from the people who have a foot on their neck right now is the best that we can do, and to provide witness and to hear and to listen and to not judge and to let that rage have its full voice. Providing it doesn't cross a certain line, into unwarranted aggression, which unfortunately, knowing human nature, sometimes that can happen too. So right now, I haven't seen that happening. I think it's really more of a defensive rage and a stance of protection, self-preservation. After years of colonization, not just recently. This is a very, very long history. But then I really love how you phrase the wondering stage as and trying to understand the humanity, or trying to understand the opponent as a strategic move. And I think that hopefully will give people something constructive to do with this. And, wondering why somebody would be susceptible to the misinformation, to the disinformation. What are they looking for? What do they need? What is broken there? I remember when Trump was elected, I think you and I were talking about how there might be very well-meaning, great people who voted for Trump, but in any case, it represents or it indicates a moral failing somewhere. So trying to understand what's going on. And that doesn't necessarily need to be the people who are right now in trauma, suffering, just trying to survive. And as you were speaking, I was feeling like, as I sit in my place of safety, not Ukrainian, not an expert, not living there right now, I feel enraged. I feel like it's not my job right now. So I'm very grateful that there are people like you and people who have a little bit more distance, who have the capacity right now to wonder a little bit more and to be more forward thinking and strategic. And I really love what you said about the rage not needing to be forever. Hopefully there will be an end to that rage, and then there will be more spaciousness and more capacity to think about things a little bit differently, to reach out for the humanity in the Russians, which I even my Ukrainian friends right now who are enraged, they still see that Russians are individuals, people. There's a range, not all Russians are evil, of course. And, in this country, where are plenty of Russians who are just as enraged about what's happening and shamed also. So, I acknowledge that and recognize that, there's a difference between the people and the politics. And there are, and I think part of the Ukrainian rage, if I can speak to it, which I really can't because I'm not Ukrainian, but I think part of it is that even some of the Russian citizens are drinking the Kool-Aid and have been drinking the Kool-Aid and have been complicit. So I think that's part of the enormity of the rage. And, Putin has very well controlled society so that the protesters are thrown in jail, and he poisons his opponents, and he has a really strong track record of doing all those things. So I would love to see a different world in which the Russian people could stand up more and get their collective feet off the Ukrainians' neck. So
I want to name that for anyone who is experiencing rage, or rage that feels like hatred. The only way for it not to last forever is not to suppress it or bypass it or try to turn it into something that it's not. I became an activist 20 years ago when a member of my community was murdered in a hate crime after 9/11, Balbir Singh Sodhi. And Michelle, when we met, I could never wonder about the gunman. It was just tending to the family's grief, and their anger was quiet. I probably had more of it than them. They were just so rooted in breathing and grieving together. But I remember feeling a kind of rage, especially when the violence didn't end, the hate violence against the Sikh community in the US. It was only by letting myself feel it, and the solution is not to suppress your rage or to let it explode, right? So many women and girls are encouraged to suppress their rage. Well, men and boys are encouraged to let it explode as a sign of their strength. But what does it mean to release our rage in safe containers? And I was thinking about our two traditions, the Sikh tradition and the Jewish tradition, Michelle, how our ancestors, they knew how to process the most powerful emotions of what it means to be alive, like the wailing and the singing and the dancing, right? And the screaming and the being, moving that energy through the body, to give our rage safe containers. And I feel like that's what I was able to find eventually. It was like safe containers for the trauma that I was taking in, for the rage I was taking in, to the point where 15 years after the murder, I could sit with the family at the gas station where Balbir Singh Sodhi was killed and ask myself, who is it that we have not yet tried to love? What about the gunman? Why? And to actually have enough spaciousness inside of me. And that was always my sign. It was the body, right? If I thought of an opponent and my whole body was activated, like heart beating fast, fist clenched, then that's good information that this is not the right time to reach out to listen, right? But once I could picture him, and I felt a little discomfort but there was enough spaciousness inside of me to wonder about him as a human being, that was when I knew that I was ready to call him in the prison with the family and begin this relationship and this act of reconciliation. And this is where I wanted, you know, when the Ukrainian poet Irvinet says, I won't forgive anyone, like, forgiveness is for you, not for them. Forgiveness is for you. And for some of us, it comes at the very end of a long journey of healing. Like in the beginning, I withheld my forgiveness because it was the only active agency that I had, right? But forgiveness is not forgetting. Forgiveness is freedom from hate. So once I went through the grieving and the raging and noticed that this hate I was carrying, I didn't need anymore. I could just let it go. Then I had forgiven, right? And once that happened, the previously unimaginable possibility of reconciliation it begins. Like forgiveness, you can do yourself. You can free yourself. Reconciliation is with the other, and it's not up to any of us to tell a survivor when to forgive. Like for some of us, it comes at the end of a long journey of healing, like it did for me. For others, like the ones who saw their loved ones killed by Dylan Roof in Charleston, for them to look into the eyes of that young man and forgive him days after, you know, it made me cringe first, but then I realized that that was their active agency. They were telling him, you cannot make me hate you. You don't have that power over me. So for some, forgiveness comes at the beginning, and for others at the end, and still for others, the messy middle. And I think if we just support people, if you're, you know, I'm imagining the next like decades for you, Michelle, that you will be sitting with Ukrainian friends and loved ones and helping them process their rage and their trauma, and saying, if you're not ready to forgive your Russian relative who still hasn't called this a war, who still doesn't see what they've done to you, it's okay, my love. You know, let's process more. let's breathe through this more, and then maybe one day it's possible to say it's possible that in 20 years you know, is it possible? So when you hear all this, Michelle, you know, and I project into the far future, right? If we're brave with our grief, if we harness our rage, if we're standing with Ukraine, is there a future where you could imagine peace between Russia and Ukraine, and Russians, Ukrainians?
That's a big question. Yes, yes. You know, when I zoom ahead 20 years, maybe 40 years, 20 feels soon to me, but absolutely, absolutely. And I think a lot depends on what steps are taken. Like with any truth and reconciliation, there has to be the truth, and naming what's happened. And that has to be, you know, a vast and global acknowledgement, I think. But I think what you say is absolutely true. You know, we forgive not for the other person's sake, but for our sake, because we don't want to walk around with that anger and hatred. And I don't know how that applies in this situation, what that will look like. But hearing you, you know, acknowledge how that it just takes its own time, you know. For some, it happens earlier, for some later, for some maybe never. And in the messy middle, I would like to think that peace is definitely possible, especially on the level, you know, the person to person level.
Yeah,
But
it takes
definitely truth has to happen.
it takes a harm. What I'm
It takes a
hearing is
what, sorry?
a cessation of harm, like
Oh,
an
yes.
harm, right? And then it takes the truth telling, and then it's like the apology and forgiveness and reconciliation work can begin in earnest. And that's like the work of a community. And in many ways, the United States is still deeply in that work with our indigenous peoples and with Black people and with other people of color, still finding within itself to tell the truth, to end the harm, to tell
Right, right.
and to get to the point where reconciliation is possible. We are not there as a nation yet, but if we're building enough capacity to do it in the space between us, maybe we'll amass enough collective wisdom to help transition the nation as a whole into a multiracial democracy. And if that's how I see it here, then I must have the audacity to see it here, even in the wake of war.
Right, right. But I think you're absolutely right. First, a cessation of violence
Yeah,
and harm.
yeah. And that's what's so hard, right? Is that we don't know when that's going to come.
Right.
Is what we are not in control of right now. And that's what makes it compass. And yet we're orienting people and ourselves to all of the other things that we can do, that we must do for that long-term change in the future that we see, right? That glimpse that we see. So this gets me to the third part of the compass. So we've talked about loving others, stranger, loving opponents, tempting the wound. And now, how do we love ourselves? And this practice I call breathe and push. This is the wisdom of the midwife, and it begins with breathing, pushing, and then transitioning. And I want to say why. You hear me use warrior metaphors, and I use birthing metaphors, and this is why I believe that the midwife has the secret to sustaining stamina, longevity in any long labor, in any long, arduous labor. She doesn't say, okay, breathe and then push, keep pushing, push, 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 push. What, as activists, and I don't know if you felt this way too, like, I just thought that's what it meant to be an actor. Like, I just thought you just push all of the time, that you grind your bones to the earth, you get 3 hours of sleep, you don't drink enough water, you make yourself sick, and that is a sign of how much you care.
Absolutely. And we have so much cultural support for that.
Right. Right. And I to the brink, right? It wasn't until the 2016 election when I just broke down again and again and again, and was losing my own will to live, that I began to understand that the midwife says, breathe, my love. Now push. Okay, now breathe again and push. And so I feel like finally I have a way to be awake to the world and show up to it and show up to the labor, because I've finally learned how to breathe. And so this practice around breathing is a practice I invite everyone to reflect on. Like, how are you breathing every day? Who are you breathing with? Are you breathing with music or meditation or poetry? Are you a presence? Are you breathing with the mountains or the sea? I live by the Atlantic, and Michelle lives by the Atlantic, and we often call each other Queen of the Atlantic and Queen of send each other images of the ocean, because for both of us, it's the ocean that puts breath in our bodies so that we can come back from the shore and show up to the work inland with clear eyes, with strong heart, with open hands. So how are you breathing? And then what is your push? What is the internal work around healing, around rage, around grief, around trauma, around showing up? What is that internal work that you are ready to do in this time in your life? And then in those moments of transition when you are being changed by the forces around you, I see you, my love, in transition right now. Like, you are seeing this country you love turn into the site of war, and it will never be the same, and you will never be the same. And to weather that kind of transition, you can never do it alone. You need your midwives at your side. Call me in the middle of the night and I'll tell you, breathe, my love, put away the phone, jump in the ocean, breathe, like, it's okay, breathe, right? And then we need our ancestors at our backs. You had, I will never forget visiting your grandfather, and we both have grandfathers who we loved deeply. And I feel like in moments of transition, I have to call upon my grandfather, like, breathe, you are brave. You are brave enough to be changed by this, to keep showing up like this, and then to access the wisdom inside of us, in those moments, to be able to love ourselves well through it. So this loving ourselves, I'm imagining, is probably the hardest practice for you right now, as it has been for me. And I want to hear what is speaking to you as you're hearing me describe it.
Oh, you know me well. um, and thank you for mentioning our beautiful ocean healing waves and our grandfathers and so many of these things that bond us. I have not been doing a great job of breathing in the last few days. I haven't slept enough, and I have felt literally breathless. Like, my heart rate is elevated and I can't get a good deep breath. So any reminder to do that, I really appreciate. And I've been trying to remind myself, but you're right. It's hard to do it alone. And I think that some of the push is comes very naturally. It's checking in on my friends in Ukraine and following what's going on in their situations. It's trying to organize ways to help to be most effective, ways to use whatever public voice I have to bring awareness, to communicate about the situation. And then, going back to that original 2002 kind of calling, it's to be that representative to other communities for whom I'm the only connection to Ukraine. And there are
Right.
lots of those. And so I feel a deep obligation and even, a passion for that. That's what I signed up for, sort of, when I kind of accepted that calling.
Mhm.
Jewish communities and other communities as well. But I've discovered a really beautiful circle of friends that I can call on, and you are in that circle for sure. But also, it's people like our friends from Divinity School who have deep relationships with other countries,
Mm.
Myanmar, Afghanistan, who know what it's like to to be away from the country they've adopted and loved and have lived in and have friends and people like family, to be far away and to feel that helplessness and to figure out what to do from afar. So having this beautiful communication with those people, um, it's been really helpful and helped me find a focus for some of my feelings so that I don't have to bring it to my Ukrainian friends who are having their own, experience, and I want to be the one that's supporting them. I don't need them to worry about me right now. So having those other people that I can turn to is really helpful. And also, for me, it's very physical, going outside, getting fresh air, going
Mm.
for a run, jumping into the cold ocean, um, doing whatever I can to break the news cycle, even just for a little while, to turn off the phone, to discipline myself to have those breaks. So, so important. Um, and then I am fortunate enough to lead meditations a couple times a week. And I find that when I'm in that position of leading a meditation, I get so many of the benefits myself. And so being able to be a leader in any capacity, I think is actually a form of self-care in many
Mm.
ways. But also those times to cocoon in and to, just relax and experience joy when it happens. Um, I think that's also really important and something that a lot of people might feel conflicted or guilty about. How do you experience joy, especially over, light things when there's so much, horror happening. But I think it's really important to do that. Those are sustaining energy, life-giving experiences as well.
And joy is actually our 10th practice. It's like the sun radiating over all of it. And because the idea is that if you can take this and orient to, revolutionary love is less of a prescription, but an orientation to life. It's a container in which to be human. And if you are letting breath in your body and showing up to your labors in this way, then your labor has enough space within it to be joyful, to let joy in. And it's so easy to feel guilty about joy, as you're saying. But the image that you gave me was the image of your friend who was, in the bomb shelter. Sirens go off. She goes upstairs. She bakes bread. They tell jokes.
Yeah.
You
Play
know,
games, tell jokes, play music in the bomb shelters. I'm sure that, many people have seen those images and heard those beautiful tracks. But
it's like it's the resilience of the human spirit and the audacity of the human.
absolutely.
And when we are doing that, um, we are participating, in that larger life-giving act.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Um, I love you so
You've, you too. I want to give you a big, big, big hug.
much. The chat has been so beautiful, and before we're going to open it up to questions now, and before I say anything else, if there's anything here that is useful to you, that it feels like medicine to you, you go to revlovehub.org, and each of these practices are a portal, and you click on anything that you need. It's like, well, I need some help right now in learning what to do with my rage or breathing or fighting. You click on that portal, and there's a whole array of practices, guided inquiries, meditations, even music, song. There's an almost a curricula entire, especially if you are a parent working with your children in your home, or if you are an educator in a classroom, or if you want to tell your kids, teachers, there's entire curriculum built. Almost everything, most everything you see on that Learning Hub is available for free, because we want to put it in your hands and let you take it as your own. So I am going to, I see, like, I think your father and my mother are on. So sweet. That is really beautiful. So we've already talked longer than I thought, but I do think we'll spend another 15 minutes with questions. And I have a set of questions that have already poured in, but I also want to honor the questions that you watching here have. And so if you have a question, now is the moment to put it in the comments, and we'll see how much we get to. And I'll offer, yeah. I'm like, which question should I go to? There, yeah. Oh, there's a lot of gratitude coming in. It's just really beautiful to be here with you all. You know, so many of these questions that came in before our chat, I think we addressed. One of them was like, how do you still find joy in your body? How do I breathe and grieve with people who are not me, who are not us? Oh, there was Jessica just offered, where do you feel joy? Well, that's a good question. This is good. Like, where do you feel it in your body? Where do you feel joy in your body? I know that Jessica has been part of a book club around the practices of revolutionary love. They just met around the practice of joy, and it was really rich and intense and life-giving for them to own into that practice during war. So for them to hear from you about like more maybe about where you find joy in your body might be helpful to them.
Sure. Well, after just a, cursory think on it, I think I feel it in my face and in my hair when I'm out on the beach and the wind is blowing really strong, and when I dive into the cold water and the very cold water comes onto my face. And it's really funny to hear myself say that, because up until recently I was very much a warm water person, but the arresting cold, it's almost for me impossible not to feel joy in those moments. And it's been such a stress relief throughout the pandemic, and now with the war, of course. So that's one place.
Beautiful. Do you know of any organizations on the ground in Eastern Europe who are looking for volunteers? And another similar question is like how to contact the Ukrainian chief who is collecting helmets and vests. So this is more just, and there was another question too about how to connect specifically with mothers and pregnant mothers and children in Ukraine. And so, I mean, I heard your invitation to go local, focus on local organizations, and people can go to the link in my bio for a list of such organizations. But any further direction you can give to people who are trying to find their in?
Yeah, so I actually did a little bit of research, and I haven't found anything that is specifically supporting pregnant women, but there's a great organization that does work in many parts of the world. You might know of it, womenforwomen.org, and that's not on the list, but I'll suggest that it gets added because I think it's doing really great work in Ukraine specifically for women. So I would advocate for that one. And then there's another one that's very, very local, communityselfhelp.org, run by friends of mine in Lviv. And another little pro tip is that it can be a little bit more effort, but it can be really useful to wire money directly to those organizations' bank accounts through SWIFT, doing a money transfer, international money transfer. And I think even Western Union has waived the fees right now for money going to Ukraine. But if you just go to an organization and hit the donate and the PayPal, that's fine too. In terms of organizations supplying like bulletproof vests and helmets, I have to look into it a little more, but I heard recently that there's an organization in Vermont that is collecting those things and sending them off to Ukraine. So I wish I could be more specific. I think any bit of Googling could probably turn up some of these specific resources, but any of them on that list will be really helpful. And then people accepting volunteers. I think there are. I think largely the work is in Poland right now and in other countries that are accepting refugees. And I know that some of the big ones like International Red Cross is one organization to check. Also Caritas, they're organizing volunteers as well. And I'm actually looking into it myself, so I'll share anything I find. But I think, if someone is thinking about volunteering, something I'm thinking about is wondering what do I have to offer? What skills do I have? What capacity do I have? Do I have the capacity to live without electricity and water for a while, which thankfully I do. I have a little bit of medical training, so I can do some medical things, but I have, for me, a skill that I think is hard to quantify. I consider myself sort of a spiritual first responder, and just being able to offer my presence. But sometimes it's about just unpacking boxes or filling up water jugs. But think about, I would say, think about what you're capable of, what your skills are. If you have language skills, you could be useful in different places. So I wish I could give a better answer for that.
I think that was really helpful. This next question is a really difficult one that perhaps we don't fully answer, but we wrestle with, we sit with. And it's, how do we ask the US to use military force when we are trying to reduce our dependency on military force? It's very similar to the wrestling that I heard us doing on the phone the other night when the war first broke out, when you were describing friends who are pacifists go out and purchase guns in order to defend their homes and their families. And that is that. So how do you, we touched upon it a little bit earlier, but if there's more to wrestle with, more to sit with in this question of using force in the short term when we really want is a world without force in the long term.
Right, right. I don't think we'll solve it right now, but we can wrestle. I mean, I think if there was ever a moment for a just war and the just use of force, we've had several. This isn't the only one, but this is one that is pretty clear. So I don't think it needs to detract from our long-term goals of becoming less dependent on military solutions. I think, unfortunately, this event is falling at a time when a lot of us are so committed to reducing military spending and all of that. I think this is one moment where we really need to use what abilities we have. I think this is a great example of how we could do that wisely, responsibly, and for a really good purpose. In terms of individuals purchasing firearms in Ukraine, they relaxed a lot of the pretty strict gun laws that they had, much stricter than we have in the US. And that was in order for people, ordinary citizens, to easily get arms to defend their neighbors, to literally defend their family members. It's really, really tough. I know a lot of people are struggling with that, as am I. And as you said, it's not so much a question of the short term, but what happens afterwards? How do you reinstate those gun laws? How do you ask people to turn in their weapons once they have them? What will happen? Will there be, Ukraine, for me, from my point of view, has, where I've lived in Ukraine, has been very safe. I felt safe walking most places alone as a woman at night. And will that sense of safety go away now that so many more people will be armed next time I go? I mean,
What I'm hearing is an acknowledgement that any use of force, large or small, comes with a cost. And that cost is moral and lasting, but manageable if we're awake to it. And I say this because I don't come from a pacifist heritage. I come from a heritage of a lineage of warriors, and became warriors during a time of profound political oppression. It was to fight the cruelty, the invasion, the conversion, the conquest, and the killing of the Mughal Empire in the north. And Sikhs defended not just themselves, but also other communities in the face of that. And it came from this commitment to see no stranger, to see others as we see ourselves, is to love others. Even so, if I see you as sister, brother, then I must let your grief into my heart, and I must fight for you when you are in harm's way. And most of the time, we can fight through nonviolent means. Some of the time, a fraction of the time, when it becomes so existential in life and death, we need to use force to defend ourselves. And most of the time, the line is not drawn there. But in this case, it really is. You see, friends, right? This is why. And if when in those moments when it is absolutely existential, when we use force to defend ourselves, if we do so with the deep knowledge that if you are a part of me I do not yet know, and I beat you or I shoot a gun at you, then, and if I cut you down, then I'm cutting a part of myself that I do not yet know. Like I'm cutting myself. And to understand that moral injury and the moral cost of hurting another on one's own soul, and then what that does to a people and what that does to a nation, and then to contend with that once that threat is over, to decide who are we now, who do we wish to be, how do we mend this. There's no going back to the point before the rupture. There's only finding a new way, torn but whole, to live into a new kind of harmony. And I think that is probably the best that we can hope for now, is to become Sant Sipahi, sage warriors, and hope that that is how hope that's how we end up on the other side of Ukraine.
Yeah, very well said. I hope so too. And it brings me back to, well, I don't know. I really don't know how I would react if I was the one holding the gun. If it was my mom who couldn't get out of the bomb shelter in time, or if it was, my good friend and her parents, and I had to stop the shooting somehow, and I had a gun in my hand. How would I
Mm,
feel about shooting to stop the
mm,
murder?
mm.
And I wonder if my friends are thinking, I know some of them are thinking the same things.
Yeah, we
You
have
know,
here that's really, when it comes to pacifist stories in my Buddhist teachings, those whose role right now is to stand up and be actual warriors, stand in front of those whose role is to hold their pacifism.
mm, wow.
Right? Because we need those to hold their pacifism to show us the world, to help us with the reimagining and the rebirthing on the other side of the crisis. Yeah.
That's profound.
Yeah. I
That's
was almost
profound work.
the question up because I was scared of it, because it's such a hard question. And I'm really grateful that we sat with it and wrestled with it.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right. And I think if I imagine a street fight, sometimes you need to intervene to break it up, and sometimes you need to use force to do that. You need
Mm-hmm.
somebody strong who can stop the attacker.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe even just by holding the attacker's arms behind his back or
Mm-hmm.
pushing him out of the way, maybe not completely destroying him, but
Mm-hmm.
enough to prevent a recurrence also.
Right. Unlike Putin's narrative, our desire is not to end Russia or
Right,
destroy Russia. It's to make them stop
right.
onslaught. Right? Yeah. Yeah. Oh, it's so good. Okay, this is beautiful. I have one more piece I want to lift up. This is from Beth. Is it possible to lead us in a brief meditation for
Mm,
when I said that, I had an idea of ending with a vision and a prayer from my own tradition. But I wanted to stop and ask you first, Michelle, if there's something that you feel called to do, if we're talking about how we're holding all these things in our bodies, the grief, the rage, the joy, the witness, the longevity.
mm.
Is there something that you wish to do or name or lift up before I close with the prayer?
Um, for everybody who is in their own homes or in their own spaces, who feels emotion right now, I would encourage people, if it works for them, to take a nice deep breath in and vocalize, shout, sing, but use their voice to just express whatever might come out. And if you don't feel comfortable doing it, maybe you just open your mouth and exhale and imagine that something's coming out. And maybe it's words of love and support, or maybe it's rage, or maybe it's just an exhale.
See this state of hearts as you were saying that. And I feel like now I'm really curious. I want to invite you all to write in the comment like the word, the one word that captures what that exhale carried. And as we share that and the diversity of that, help, holding space for joy, release, assured, stop, meaning, huge concern, anguish, solidarity, frustration, compassion, howl, feel. Joy is a revolutionary act. Peace, hope, tension, courage, heartache and peace, and show up and ooh, ah. No one body can carry the magnitude of what is happening right now, but our collective body can. And so for us to hold the hope while another holds tension, for one to hold the joy while another holds grief, and then to be able to play the role when it's your time to hold something else. Oh, this one says it, love for humanity and sadness for humanity, right? Hold all of it, hold all of it is what I believe we can do together, what we can do in community. So many of you asked, I loved your words, replay, send a shield over the people of Ukraine. That will be the final meditation I'll end with. Before I do that, many of you have asked if there's a recording of this available, and what we're going to do is keep it on my Instagram feed so you'll be able to play it. And then for a lot of folks who don't have Instagram, we'll make sure we can link to it. If you sign up for the Revolutionary Love newsletter, if you go to that hub, revlovehub.org or revlovehub.com. I hope I didn't put the wrong URL in. If you go to that, revlovehub.org or .com, another way to do it is seenostranger.com. If you go to seenostranger.com, you'll see a way to sign up, and we'll drop an email in your inbox in the coming weeks, and it'll contain a link to this video. So if there are people you want to be in community with around the themes that we've discussed, and even around these revolutionary love practices, you can do so by inviting them to share this experience with you. It's .com. Thank you for me now, everybody. Oh my goodness. I'm going to that and put the correct one in. So just at the very end here, revlovehub.com post. Oh goodness. Thank you. Thank you. All right. So I'm going to preface this with a story. So Michelle, after you and I talked that first night when it was all just unfolding, the next night, after the first full day of the war, Gubby, my son, just turned 7, and so I debated whether to tell him or not. And in the end, I found myself explaining war to my child for the first time, just as an idea, just as a concept. And he really took it in. And the one time he had heard the word war before was in hearing Papaji's story, my grandfather's story. of being a soldier in World War II and sleeping at night during the German air raids overhead and being able to sleep through the night because he recited this prayer, this shabad. And he imagined this shabad as this shield of love. And I would imagine as this golden shimmering shield of love that was. And Michelle, you know what Kavi said? It's like, Mommy, do they know the prayer? But do they know it? Like, so worried that they didn't know it, that the children and families of Ukraine did. I said, Gavi, they're all different kinds of prayers and poems and all kinds of ways to make that shield. But he's like, Mommy, we better say it because they probably don't know this one. I'm like, okay, so we can say it. So what we did was, as we were saying the Shabad, we imagined the words are Tati Vauna Lagi, Bad Brahm Shanai. Tati Vaun is hot winds. Tati Vaun Na Lagi, the hot winds cannot touch you. Bad Brahm Shanai, you are shielded by God, or you're shielded by the divine, or you are shielded by love. So Tati Vauna Lagi, Bad Brahm Shanai, the hot winds cannot touch you, you are shielded by love. And as there's my mom giving her hearts. That's what happened. Tell her the next day. As we did that, this is the Shabad that my mother was reciting to me on the birthing table when Gavi was coming out of my body in transition, right? You were shielded by love. So this prayer for fearlessness, right? On the birthing table and on the battlefield. And wherever you are, may my grandfather's prayer be yours. So as I recite it now, I invite you, as we did, Gavi and I, to close your eyes and to feel your feet on the earth and to imagine those roots shooting down from your feet, going through the earth horizontally, reaching out in all directions until there you've made it to Boston. You're intertwining with Michelle's roots. And there you've made it all the way to Los Angeles, and you're intertwining with my roots. And there you're stretching those roots to Ukraine, and you're intertwining with those roots, and go further, go to the soil beneath the camps of the Syrian refugees, go to the border in Tijuana, go to Myanmar, go to Afghanistan, go to the places in your mind where you know people are hurting, where people might think that they are alone, where there might be the fiction of helplessness. And there, my love, we are like trees in the forest. We look as though we are standing apart, but we are interconnected, we are interdependent. And just like those trees, we can send each other energy and nourishment and medicine through those roots. Do you feel that right now? I feel my roots connected with all of you, hundreds of you listening right now. Good, and I feel like a tingling in my feet. Do you feel that? Okay, now from this place, that deep breath that Michelle invited us into, let it come and let it go. And this time, as you breathe in, you're breathing in the energy that we are sending you through those roots. Let it come. And as you breathe out, you're sending breath to all of us, all of those who most need it. Let it go. One more breath. Let it come. Let it go. You're breathing together. And in breathing together, let these words just wash over you. And as you do so, imagine a golden shimmering shield around the families and the people of Ukraine. ताती वाव न लगी पार ब्रह्म शनाई जोगित हमारे राम कार दुख लगे ना पाई सतगुर पूरा पेटिया जिन बंत बनाई राम नाम मुख दिया एक काले वलाई रख लियो तिन रखन हार सब याद मिटाई को नानक कृपा पे प्रापे सहाय वाहिगुरु जी का खालसा Vaheguru Ji ki Fateh. The beloved community belongs to divine oneness, and so does all that it achieves. You can open your eyes, unfurl your fingers, notice what you're feeling in your body. My love, what you notice.
What did you say, Valerie? I missed that line, that last line.
What do you notice in your body now? I'm just
Oh,
imagining sat down.
I am, that was beautiful. And I am really feeling so much calmer and so much stronger, that some of that breathlessness and skittishness is transformed into a stable, strong energy, fueled by, I mean, I don't mean to be cliche, but fueled by the revolutionary love that you've shared with us.
Mhm.
It's both revolutionary and it's love.
Oh, I love you so much. I just want to just wrapping my arms around you. Soon I'll be in Boston. I'm speaking in Tufts in 2 weeks, and we are going to walk those cobblestone streets. And
We absolutely will. We will sip some delicious chocolate and experience that joy.
yes, and give each other that energy. Oh,
Yes.
yeah. I wish for each of you, I mean, just so beautiful. You're feeling unity, calmer, more grateful, hopeful. This is the medicine you needed today. I'm so grateful to hear this release, the strong energy from Revolutionary. May our shields dissolve all the bombs and ammunitions. It's beautiful. Know that whenever you're feeling the next moment of sadness or despair or aloneness, that separateness is an illusion, onto each other, that those roots under the earth are still there. Still there, even when you're alone in the closet hiding from your children. I just call Michelle, like, there it is. But it's there even before we picked up the phone, right? It's there that we are here. Billions of us, all of us, knowing this, feeling this, rising and this, breathing like this. And that is the strong, steady energy, I think, that can and must change the world. So access this when you need it. Know that we are right here with you and that we're moving through this together. May you be safe. So love to all of you. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
And thank you so much to you, Valarie, for holding this space and for this conversation, for going public with me with this conversation. And we'll continue in the middle of the night.
Our talks are always longer than we think they are. And that's why it's been an hour 45 minutes. Thank you for being here with us. Okay. Bye, everybody. Bye.
Okay.
Mwah.
Mwah.